Okay, let's see how fast we can boot this SE30 with this custom ROM SIMM. Hold down the R key, get ready to start our timer here. Ready, go. Desktop. 1.65 seconds, hey! Hello friends, today I'm going to show you how to have even more fun with vintage Macs like the SE30 using this nifty little programmer and custom ROM SIMMs. But first, a little history. Way back in 2003, Jeff Walther, also known as Trag at the 68K MLA and Tinker Different forums, assisted a well-known vintage Mac enthusiast named Gamba in the earliest known hobbyist creation of a Macintosh ROM SIMM. Gamba was, and still is, highly regarded in the vintage Mac community for his wonderfully helpful website detailing his critically important work on topics like SE30 internal grayscale, adding multiple PDS cards to the SE30, and how to use a Mac 2SI or 2FX ROM SIMM in an SE30 to run newer system software like 7.6 or even OS 8.1. Gamba's site also offered Apple service manuals and a host of important links. Gamba sadly passed away in November 2003, but you can still visit his website today at vintageapple.org or the Internet Archive. ROMs from a Macintosh 2SI, 2CI, and 2FX are special in that they are 32-bit clean, allowing use of more than 8 megabytes of RAM, and they can be used in many different 68K Mac models, including the wildly popular SE30. Jeff and Gamba embarked on creating a Macintosh 2CI ROM SIMM only because that was the Mac Jeff had on hand at the time. A photo of the resulting handmade ROM SIMM is shown on Gamba's website. Wires are used on back because it was a single-layer PCB. Wally94087 acquired Gamba's first two ROM SIMM creations about 16 years ago at a Silicon Valley free cycle. This photo shows another look at the first edition board, as well as the second edition PCB, which was dual-layer. Wally also acquired various Gamba files like the schematic, which until now have not been published anywhere else on the internet. For all the details about this amazing ROM SIMM creation, please see Jeff Walther's recent post on Tinker Different, which I've linked for you in the text description below. The next evolution of ROM SIMM work began in 2011 by Downtown Doug Brown, who designed the first easily flashable ROM SIMMs with a matching programmer and an app for OS X and Linux. Downtown was the nickname given to Doug by his teammates when he once made a surprise three-point shot during a high school basketball game. 68K MLA member olePigeon designed the skull and crossbones Jolly Roger logo that adorns Doug's original programmer. Rob Braun was the coding genius who did the critically important work of modifying a Macintosh 2SI ROM with a ROM disk driver that allows booting from the ROM, similar to a Macintosh Classic. Doug sold his ROM SIMMs and programmer from 2012 through 2015. In 2016, Steve Chamberlin of Big Mess of Wires came to an agreement with Doug to exclusively sell a smaller, improved version programmer. Steve added special features to his ROM-inator 2 branded ROM SIMMs, including Rob Braun's ROM disk driver with Rob's permission, and Steve introduced his open-source FC8 Compression scheme that allows much more software to fit on the ROM disk. Steve also added a custom startup chime, custom boot icon, new startup screen, and important under-the-hood improvements. Big Mess of Wires began sales of the ROM-inator 2 with a 4 megabyte version, later expanding the range to include an 8 megabyte ROM-inator 2 Mega. A parts shortage in 2019 caused Big Mess of Wires to discontinue the programmer and both ROM SIMMs, but Steve later added a pre-programmed 2 megabyte ROM SIMM called Atom, which continues to be sold today. Adding that history to a timeline, we see that friendly competition began to heat up in 2017 with GGLABs offering 512K and 2 megabyte ROM SIMMs. Then in 2020, Garrett's Workshop announced their unique dual 8 megabyte ROM SIMM, which unfortunately hasn't gone on sale yet. In 2022, CiliconInsider began sales of their 2 megabyte ROM SIMM, followed by Koba of Kero's Mac Mod selling a 2 megabyte SIMM with a custom app called Crucible. CayMac Vintage followed only a couple months later with an offering of 2, 4, and 8 megabyte SIMMs, also resurrecting the programmer which hadn't been sold since 2019. Doug Brown also made some groundbreaking changes to his app. This is the Big Mess of Wires programmer that was discontinued in 2019. And this is the CayMac Vintage programmer that was introduced earlier this year in 2023. The two are pretty much the same except for minor differences. For example, the CayMac programmer was made very slightly wider to accommodate this row of PCB pads for more convenient probing and prototyping purposes. These pads were part of Doug's original programmer design. Also, the direction of power on is opposite between the two programmers, and the connector, USB connector type, is also different. Of course, the PCB colors and the silkscreen logos are different, but they are functionally the same, which is also true of Doug's original programmer. I also have a variety of ROM SIMs, two of which are from CayMac Vintage. I also have a Kero's Mac Mods ROM SIM, one from Garrett's Workshop, and also one from Big Mess of Wires. Here's why you might want to buy one for your vintage Mac. It lets an SE30, 2X, 2CX, and 2FX boot from an HD20 serial hard drive or a floppy EMU in HD20 mode. I have a 400 megabyte HD20 drive image on my floppy EMU and use it all the time with my SE30, thanks to my custom ROM SIM. It's also 32-bit clean, which means you no longer need the Mode 32 extension on an SE30, 2X, or 2CX to use more than 8 megabytes of RAM. It enables the SE30, 2X, and 2CX to run System 7.6.1 and OS 8.1 with a simple system file hack using ResEdit. The ROM feature I really love is the disabling of the horribly slow RAM checking at power on, which lets your Mac boot much faster. Another huge benefit is that you can opt to boot from a ROM disk, which you can customize with your favorite software. You can also boot from a RAM disk if you have 16 megabytes of RAM or more, which lets you save or delete files until you power off your Mac. Custom ROM SIMs are a great solution if you have a defective or missing stock ROM. Lastly, if you use the Big Mess of Wires base ROM file, you can use FC8 Compression to fit much more software on your custom ROM disk image. There's actually one more benefit to having a custom ROM SIM if you're an SE30 owner. When using the stock SE30 ROM, if you put 4 16 megabyte RAM SIMs into bank A and leave bank B empty, when you switch on power, this happens. But with a custom ROM SIM installed, there are no issues whatsoever with that 64 megabyte RAM configuration. Now, before you start using custom ROM SIMs, it's very important that you first swap out all of the fluid-filled aluminum electrolytic capacitors that are found on your motherboard, and in cases of compact Macs like this SE30, on your analog board, which is this board here, and also in the power supply to ensure a base system that is perfectly stable with the stock ROM SIM. And then when you later put in your custom ROM SIM, if you ever have any kind of trouble, you know that your base system works fine without the custom ROM SIM, which will make it much easier to track down the problem. Now, some ROMs, like the CayMac 4 and 8 megabyte SIMs, come pre-installed with bootable software on them, which is really great to have. And if you pay them an additional $10, they will allow you to send over your own custom disk image, which they will flash for you. There are other ROM vendors which may be willing to flash that for free. Others may not do it at all. You need to check the respective vendor product pages for more details on that. But basically, even if you start off with the ideal disk image flashed to your SIM, after you use it for a while, you may grow tired of it, or probably you're going to find something is missing. And that's because yet another benefit of these ROM SIMs is that you can use them for diagnosing your Mac. And because they're not a peripheral, this is on your motherboard, you can use it to diagnose peripherals like a bad blue SCSI, a bad spinning hard drive, a bad floppy drive. You just boot from the ROM and use the utilities on there to diagnose it. But what if you need a utility that isn't already on there? Well, that's why having the programmer is great. Another reason for having the programmer is that if you buy an accelerator board for your Mac at some point, almost all of them do not give you maximum performance until you install a control panel or an extension. And how are you going to do that without a programmer? You would need to make a modified disk image and then flash that to your ROM SIM. So these are the reasons why it's important to have a programmer. Yet another reason is this is the ROM SIMM from Kero's Mac Mods, K-Koba. The design, based on my observation anyway, is quite similar to that of SiliconInsider and GGLABs, all of which use socketed chips, and 4 of them too. And in the case of K-Koba, the way that you reprogram it is you have to pluck out each of the 4 chips very carefully, and then you have to use a Windows PC and a special programmer. And you have to program the chips one at a time individually with part of the ROM code. And then you have to carefully put the chips back into the correct socket positions. And it's all very fiddly and troublesome in my opinion. Based on my observation, I believe it's the same for SiliconInsider and GGLABs too. But the good news is that, thanks to the CayMac programmer, all of that trouble is a thing of the past. You don't have to pull out the chips anymore. You just take your ROM SIMM, put it into the programmer, and flash it. It is so nice. And not only that, but you can use your modern Mac to do the flashing as well. No need to taint yourself with Microsoft Windows, and that's something this Mac addict loves. Now, let's take a look at how you can create your own disk image and then flash that to a ROM SIMM. Creating a new disk image is now super easy thanks to Doug Brown's version 2 SIMM Programmer app. Doug made a number of incredible improvements to the app in August 2023, including a Create Blank Disk Image command in the File menu. You can access that menu command even if you don't have a programmer. Which blank disk image size you choose depends on the size of your ROM SIMM and depends on which ROM file will be used. Just as I was finishing making this video on September 8th, 2023, Steve Chamberlin made an announcement on his website to say that his base ROM file is now free for personal use with any ROM SIMM sold by any ROM SIMM vendor. That ROM supports Steve Chamberlin's FC8 compression scheme, and I've put a link to this page in the text description for you. Simply put, because the Big Mess of Wire ROM file supports FC8, you can download Doug Brown's SIMM Programmer app and choose any of the compressed or uncompressed disk image sizes according to the size of your ROM SIMM. My speed testing on a stock SE30 shows boot speed is only 1 second slower with FC8 compression compared to uncompressed when booting System 6 on a 2 MB ROM SIMM. I strongly recommend that you use the Big Mess of Wire's base ROM file because it allows you to fit so much more software on your ROM SIMM. Rob Braun's website allows you to download 2 versions of his modified 2SI ROM files. They're free to download for personal use. And they're even free if you want to redistribute them commercially too, although Rob told me that he would appreciate it if you would please contact him first before flashing it to a ROM file that you're going to sell, so that if there's ever a problem, he could possibly fix it for everyone. All ROM SIMM vendors other than Big Mess of Wires and CayMac Vintage seem to use Rob Braun's modified ROM file as is, or some variation of it, which means FC8 compression is not supported. That means you can't use any of the compressed disk image choices in the SIMM Programmer Create Blank Disk window. Now it looks like there are 3 files displayed here in this section, but actually the middle one has a disk image embedded in it, so you shouldn't consider this. There's basically this 0.9 and 0.9.6 base ROM file. And the reason Rob made 2 files is because the 0.9.6 file was made for 8 MB ROM SIMMs, and the other 0.9 file was made for 2 MB ROM SIMMs. And that's because Rob's ROM files do not auto-detect the ROM size. But thanks to the coding magic of downtown Doug Brown, you can now download Rob's 0.9.6 ROM file, which is compatible with 8 MB ROM SIMMs, and the patch will automatically make it work on 2, 4, and 8 MB ROM SIMMs. Amazing work, Doug! So remember, download this file that I'm showing you here that's highlighted, and do not download any of the other files. I'll now show you how to create a disk image for use with Rob Braun's 8 MB ROM file with the intention of flashing it to a 2 MB ROM SIMM. Let's start by choosing the 1.5 megabyte for 2 megabyte SIMM uncompressed option here, then click Save. Then type a name here, and I'm going to save it to the desktop. Next, we'll use Mini vMac to add software to the blank image. And to make your life easier, I created a zip archive of all the files you see here. And you'll find the download link to that archive in the text description. Now, there are 2 README files here that are very useful in case you forget what you see in this video. And in the Mini vMac Stuff folder here, you'll see 2 folders which offer different Mini vMac versions. Even though I'm using an M1 Mac right now, I will still use the Intel version here. That is because there's a bug in the beta, Apple Silicon version beta of Mini vMac that unfortunately doesn't allow you to use unformatted disk images, which is what the disk images that SIMM Programmer creates for you, or even if you use the DD command in the macOS terminal, those are also unformatted. But don't worry, the Intel version of Mini vMac works just fine on Apple Silicon Macs thanks to Rosetta. Now, you should move all 4 of these files into your Applications folder. I'm not going to do that now. We'll just use them where they are for now. But that's important if you're going to keep this on your computer and use it. And by the way, when you first launch the app, sometimes it will give you an error saying it can't find the ROM file, which should never happen if you have the ROM files in the same folder. Like if you put all these in the Applications folder, they should all be on the same hierarchy level. And it shouldn't ever give you that error. But the fix, strange enough, it works. You just drag it to a different place, then drag it back. And the very act of dragging seems to fix it. So I don't know if that's something inherent to Apple Silicon Macs, a bug in the app itself, or what, but that seems to be a fix in case you ever get a message saying it cannot locate the ROM file. Okay, so now we need to know which disk image we're going to use to boot one of our Mini vMac emulators. And we can see down at the bottom that I have created a System 7.5.5 disk image for you. And looking up here, we see that I made 6 more, 3 here and 3 here. 6 more disk images for you. And all of these are bootable. These boot into System 6.0.8. Now you'll note that there are 2 copies of Mini vMac, and the one with 26 in the name emulates a Macintosh 2, and the other one emulates a Macintosh Plus. Now, System 6 will boot either app, but I prefer to use the Mac Plus emulation version app for System 6, and I tend to use System 7 in the Macintosh 2 version. So because we're going to prepare a 1.5 megabyte disk image, you could actually use this as is, but I'm trying to teach you how to use Mini vMac, so we won't just use it as is. But we can boot from it, and to boot from it, all we do is just drag it on top of the Mac Plus version of Mini vMac, and it bongs, and there we go. Now, you could see it booted very fast because this is an Apple Silicon Mac, but if you hold down the Control key and press H, you'll see all of the different options for Mini vMac, and one of them is F. I'm still holding down the Control key, by the way, and F makes it bigger like this, which is nice. But also I want to mention that if you hold down the S key, then you can control the emulation speed. And if I now press A, it's as fast as it will go. But if I go back and press S and then Z, then it will be as slow as maybe a Mac Plus. But we'll go ahead and do S and then A for maximum speed. Now I need to do Control F to make it smaller, because what I want to do is mount the image that we freshly created. Remember, we made this image on the desktop using the SIMM Programmer app. To mount that, you just use drag and drop. Boom, and there it goes. Now it's unformatted, so we need to initialize, then erase it, and then give it a name, whatever you'd like. It doesn't really matter. And there we are, fresh new disk image, freshly formatted, about 1.5 megabytes of disk space too. Now, because of the size of the 2 megabyte ROM SIMMs, the ROM SIMM is 2 megabyte, but you only have 1.5 megabytes of space on an uncompressed ROM SIMM to use. And so I would recommend System 6. And what do you know, we have a System 6 system folder here that's only about a megabyte in size, so let's just drag that over to copy it. Boom, and this is emulation, so it copies really fast. And you'll notice that we have let me make this bigger for you, 440 kilobytes of available space for adding apps. Now you could use Font DA Mover to remove some fonts. Remember, for System 6, you can't just pull fonts out of a fonts folder. They're embedded into the system file, so you have to use a program called Font DA Mover to remove them. And you could do that, but if you remove too many fonts, then the text documents that you might want to read won't display correctly, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to shut down and close this. So I can now boot System 7.5.5 using the Mac 2 version of Mini vMac. I'm going to speed it up, Control SA. That makes it go really fast. And the reason I'm booting into System 7.5.5 now is so we can use the latest version of STUFFIT Expander that can be used on System 7, which is version 5.5. And I cannot run this under System 6. So that's really the main reason to use it. And you might say, well, why do you need version 5.5? And the answer is, with 5.5, I can decompress most any SIT file, SIT file that you find on the internet, including Macintosh Garden. And if you're wondering, why didn't I just launch System 7.5.5 from the beginning, it's because our ROM SIMM will use System 6. And if you open your System 6 volume in System 7 will hide desktop and trash folders on it. And so to avoid all that mess, I'm just going to download my files into this System 7 environment, and then later I'll boot into System 6 and copy those files over. Now you're probably wondering, why is it in grayscale? And I think that's a bug. No matter how many times I open up the monitor's control panel and set it to color, as soon as I restart it goes back to grayscale. But again, you can change it to color easily just using monitors like I just did. Let's now download something from the Macintosh Garden, such as a game. How about Tetris? Get the top one here, and just go ahead and get the top download. This is the Spectrum Holobyte version of Tetris. Okay, so we can see that the file is here, and it's an image file, but it's SIT compressed with STUFFIT. So if you don't already have STUFFIT, you need to go to stuffit.com and download STUFFIT Expander, which you can get for the Mac, for Windows, for iOS. And I already have it installed on my computer here. So what I'm going to do is just load up STUFFIT Expander, and it puts this little drop area here. And then we can just drag it over here. And there it is. So I'll quit the Expander. And then to mount our image, all we have to do is just use drag and drop. And there it is. And when we open it, we can see that there's one that's called color, which implies that this one is black and white. So let's go ahead and open the color one and see what happens. Okay, very nice. Beautiful graphics. We have some nice sound here as well. All right, that works really great. But let's see how big it is. It says this is 351K, and we have 445K, so that will fit. But I suspect it's going to require this PIX resource, which is 774K, and which would not fit. But to test that, we can copy this file to our System 7.5.5 disk. And to make sure that won't interfere, we'll eject it and then double click to see what happens. And it says, reinsert our 7.5.5 disk. Okay, not sure what's going on there. Okay, it froze. It froze. So that's what I thought. It requires resources that aren't there. It's complaining, so we need to quit out of here, Mini vMac, and then relaunch it again. It didn't like that. So that's, I'm teaching. I knew that was going to happen, but I wanted to just show that to you anyway, so that some things don't work out, and you have to reboot the Mini vMac environment. So we know that's not going to work. We're going to just trash it, and then we are going to mount our Tetris game again. And so this time, how about the black and white? I'm going to use it on the SC30 anyway. That's all we really need. 240K. Great. Okay. So I'm going to copy this one over. Now I suspect that this will probably need sounds, but this is 243K. So those two files combined won't fit. So let's just try the game without the sounds and see what happens. We'll empty trash here. Okay, so the game is working, and it doesn't have any sound because we didn't copy the sounds file over, but we can see that it is working. So we can use this on our ROM SIMM. Next, let's go back to Macintosh Garden and download a utility. I think one of the most important ones would probably be System Picker, so that you can choose which system folder to boot from on any particular drive. And the top download here is the newest version, so I'll go ahead and download that. And here is System Picker. This is a ZIP file. Now, unfortunately, you can't just drag and drop ZIP files to the mini vMac environment because it thinks it's a disk image, which it's not. So we can't use that. But you need an app called Import FL, which is this little guy down here, which I've already pre-installed for you. And all you need to do is just double-click that, and then you have to press Control-O. And then on our downloads, we see there's the file. So we'll just click Open, and we're going to save it to the desktop. And then we quit. And then we need to decompress it within the mini vMac environment, which means we just drag it down to STUFFIT Expander. And there it is. So you can just open it up and just drag out the app. That's all we need. I'm going to copy it to my System 7.5.5 disk. And I'm just going to go with these two. And we can see that this one is only 40K. So 240 plus 40 is 280K. That combination will definitely fit without a problem. So let's shut down so that we can go back to the Mac Plus environment. And again, we're keeping all of this, the final job, in the Mac Plus environment. And we can actually boot from our image that we created. So that we don't have hidden files there. Okay, so remember, this is the blank image that we created, that we copied the System 6 system folder to originally. It has 445K free. And now we're going to get our System 7.5.5 disk. And you can see here, this is System 7.5.5, so trash folder. You didn't see that in the System 7 environment. Desktop folder, you didn't see that. These are hidden folders normally, but in System 6 they display. And so that's why I want to do everything in System 6. But anyway, this is just a drive where we've saved our files to. So we want to copy these over here like this. And we can close and remove System 7. And it's important that you make everything look pretty, right? Because if we make our ROM, just like this, whenever you boot from ROM, it's going to look just like this, with this huge honking window open here and all this dead space. I mean, maybe you don't care about that. I'm one of those finicky guys who does. So let's just put, we only have 2 apps, right? You don't need folders. You can just put them up here like this, make it nice and compact so it looks good. If you make it too compact, you get the scroll bar, so I don't like that, right? Make it look pretty. Because again, when you boot, every time you boot from ROM, this is exactly what you're going to see. And if you close it like this, then it's going to boot closed. So if you want it to boot with the window open, you have to leave it open like this. Okay, so what we're going to do now is restart. And there's a reason, I'm going to explain it. But we need to press Control S and slow it down. I'm going to push number 2 to make it 4x faster, which is slow enough. So now I'm going to drag it over here, but before I release, I'm going to press Command and Option. And that will ask me, do I want to rebuild the desktop? And the answer is yes, I do. It will rebuild. And the reason to do that is because I have found when I try to boot from ROMs on my SC30 where I did not do that, it gives me an error sometimes. So to avoid that error, you need to rebuild the desktop once everything is done, right? Now, as you can see, let me make it bigger so you can see it. 167 kilobytes of space available. That's kind of a waste. If you're actually making a ROM SIMM that's uncompressed, you want to fill it up as much as possible. Even if it says 0K, that's okay. But just to make sure that this tutorial isn't too long, this is all I'm going to put on this particular disk image. And also, let's go ahead and go up here. You'll notice a lot of nice things fast find. That's not something you normally get with System 6. I put a lot of nice goodies in the Apple menu for you, which is why if you want a nice System 6 folder, you can use one that's on one of my 6 images. But the system folder that's on the smaller 1.5 megabyte disk image that I created, that's the smallest system folder of all. But we want to go up to Control Panel before we finalize everything so that you can turn on RAM cache. I mean, assuming you want it on when you boot from your ROM. Turn off, I don't like the menu blinking. And we'll make sure the mouse goes faster, and then, because on your computer you want it to be. And then we'll do the monkey. And then we have everything set here. So we just need to now shut down. I'll now put a 2 megabyte ROM sim into the programmer. By the way, this is the official frosted case that CayMac made. They probably will sell these cases at some point, but for now, I put a link to the 3D printable STL files for you in the text description below. I will now connect the sim programmer to my Mac and then switch on power. And that causes the sim programmer app to come to life. I'm going to download the Rob Braun file for 8 megabytes. Remember, download only this one that says 8 megabytes, 0.9.6, and not any of the others. And here's our Rob Braun ROM file. Now, in the sim programmer app, there are 3 tabs: write file to sim, create ROM with ROM disk, and read. We want to click on the middle one, create ROM with ROM disk. Okay, and then we want to drag in the ROM file into the top field here. That's the base ROM. And then we created this disk image, so we want to put that here. Now the next step is you could choose your sim capacity here, but you can also click this Identify Chips button. And that tells you exactly the type of ROM sim that we have. This is a CayMac ROM sim, by the way. But it could be any of the other makers, like a GGLABs, Keikoba, whatever, 2 megabyte ROM sim. But it will tell you according to which ROM sim you have. And that way you don't need to set the sim capacity, because now it has been set for you. You do not need to verify technically, but since this is your first time doing this, it would be good to enable verify. I would suggest you change it to verify after writing, because that is the fastest verify and it's just as accurate as the other verify. And then here, the default is erase write entire sim, and that is the correct setting. So now we just click write to sim, and it does a little erase sequence. And after that, the LED will start flashing on the programmer, and it's just a matter of waiting until it's finished. Great, it says it verified successfully. So now we can switch off. Don't remove it until you switch it off, but switch off the programmer, and you can see that the sim programmer app changes back to the nothing connected state. And then you carefully remove your ROM sim. I'm now going to test in my SE30 motherboard, which has a very nice ROM socket with metal tabs. And I paid my friend Keikoba to actually swap out the old socket because it was a really bad one, and he replaced it with this one. I also paid him to swap out all of the RAM sockets too, so all of the sockets have nice metal tabs, and that eliminates a lot of problems. But don't worry, I'll show you another SE30 motherboard later which has problematic plastic tabs, and I'll show you the solution to that problem. So I'll just install my sim now. Now I'm going to power on the SE30. Okay, great, got a bong, and quickly press the R key and hold it so that we can boot from ROM. And there we go! Woohoo! And we can see Tetris and System Picker here too. And we can open up our game. It loads just fine, and of course it doesn't play the sounds because of what we talked about before. We didn't have enough space on this particular ROM to do that, but yeah, the game works great. And we can open up our System Picker here, and there it goes. So System Picker is working. And we see all of the useful menu items there. You've got a timer. You've got timeout, which is a bricks ping pong game. And I got a full calendar. Even have a fancy calculator too. So lots of great stuff on this particular ROM. Okay, let's restart. This time I'm going to press the A and the R keys both together, and that boots from a RAM disk. And we just showed that that's working as well. So the nice thing about this is you can delete files now. So if we want to delete System Picker, are you sure? Yes. Empty trash, and there it went up. We can even delete Tetris if we want, right? Just go ahead, 205K available, empty trash, 445K available. So the nice thing is that sometimes you need to save files, and this will allow you to save files temporarily at least to the RAM disk. And then if you connect a SCSI drive or something else, then you would need to move your file to that drive. Otherwise you would lose it forever once you shut down. But basically there are some software apps that want to save files, or otherwise they'll generate an error. So being able to boot into RAM disk is very useful. And this is possible because in this motherboard I currently have more than 16 megabytes of RAM. So long as you have 16 megabytes or more, you can use the RAM disk function. And in the case of Rob Braun's ROM, it's A and R. In the case of the Big Mess of Wires ROM, you just push only A. Once again, here are the 6 disk images I made for you. 3 must be used with the Big Mess of Wires ROM file that supports FC8, and the other 3 can be used with Rob Braun's file or the Big Mess of Wires ROM file. The most awesome one, of course, is my 12 megabyte image, which requires an 8 megabyte ROM SIMM. So let's use it to boot Mini vMac. You can see that I have it completely packed with a huge number of games here, including my favorite version of Tetris called Tetris Max by Steve Chamberlin. Now Steve is truly amazing because when I discovered that his game wouldn't work when booted into System 6, Steve proceeded to do a major bug fix, and that's a big deal because Steve hadn't done one in decades. His new version 2.9.3b works great now under System 6 and when booted from a ROM, and it shows just what an incredible person Steve Chamberlin is. And if you're wondering why I like Tetris so much, it's the perfect game. Not the bad. Now here's the Tetris Max color version playing on the Mac 2 version of Mini vMac, and I must say that even though it doesn't have the fancy graphics of the Spectrum Holobyte version, what makes Tetris Max so great are the sound effects and music. I think it's absolutely fantastic. You can see I also packed a lot of great utilities on this 12 megabyte disk image, and I even included Photoshop 1.1. Photoshop is great when you want to make graphics that fill the entire screen and also hide the toolbar and the menu bar. I also included text editor apps so you can open and read README files and even create new text files. And I included some of the best After Dark screensavers as well. Now bear in mind that you will need an 8 megabyte ROM SIMM to use this disk image, and currently only CayMac Vintage sells ROM SIMMs that big because Garrett's workshop hasn't begun sales of their ROM SIMM yet. Let me quickly show you how easy this is to flash to an 8 megabyte ROM SIMM. I'll put it on my ROM-inator 2 Mega, which is no longer sold, but it's pretty much the same as the 8 megabyte CayMac Vintage SIMM, which I unfortunately don't have. So I will launch the SIMM Programmer app. We can see down here ROM files flashable as is, and this JDW ROM is flashable as is. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this Write File to SIMM tab here, and then I'm going to identify chips, which will then automatically set the SIMM capacity. And then I'm just going to drag in my ROM file and then click Write to SIMM because everything else is set up just fine. Let's test this 8 megabyte ROM SIMM in my SE30 board, which has a white ROM socket with plastic tabs. Powering on shows the problem. There's no startup chime and artifacts on the screen. One reason that happens is because this ROM SIMM measures only about 1.13 millimeters across the pads in some places, 1.18 in others. It's very thin. But the stock SE30 ROM, which has no problems whatsoever in that motherboard, measures 1.28 millimeters across the pads in places, and in others, 1.30. That may not sound like much, but it makes all the difference. Big Mess of Wires has sold ROM SIMMs in different thicknesses throughout the years, including this ROM-inator 2 Mega 8 megabyte, which is no longer sold. But Steve Chamberlin told me that his Atom SIMMs will soon be available in a thickness of about 1.27 millimeters. GGLABs' beautiful matte black ROM SIMMs have been on sale for the past 2 to 3 years and feature a nominal thickness of 1.27 millimeters, which is perfect. That's why the GGLABs ROM SIMMs have no problem whatsoever in this otherwise troublesome ROM socket. The next reason the SE30 will often freeze with some ROM SIMMs is described by Kay Koba on the Tinker Different forum. As Kay mentions, some motherboards will start to sag and permanently warp over time, and that of course warps the socket as well. Thicker ROM SIMMs often work fine in a warped SIMM socket, but thinner ROM SIMMs don't. The good news is that PotatoFi created a low-cost solution called ROM clips. Because I don't have a 3D printer, Colin of This Does Not Compute very graciously printed both types of ROM clips and mailed them to me. Thank you, Colin! All of my SE30 motherboards have ROM socket tabs which require Type A ROM clips. They slide on very easy like this. And now when we power on, we get a bong. And holding down the R key boots right away from ROM. Great. CayMac Vintage will give you ROM clips for free if you ask for them when buying a ROM SIMM. Other ROM vendors may not provide them, so you'll probably need to use an online printing service or print them yourself. I found 2 small problems with ROM clips. First, I found that ROM clips aren't compatible with the Kero's Mac Mods ROM SIMM unless you desolder the LED on back and clean all of the solder off the pads like you see I've done here. Only then will the right side clip slide down on this ROM SIMM. But the good news is that PotatoFi told me he's considering a fix of his 3D files to accommodate this. The second problem is that I cannot install my MacCon Ethernet card, because this protruding edge touches the clip, and this type of problem cannot be fixed by modifications to the clip. The good news is I tested all my other PDS cards and they work fine with ROM clips, so only the MacCon is not compatible. ROM clips are great, but the best solution is to pay somebody to swap out your ROM SIMM socket with a new one that has metal tabs. Of course, that's more costly and time-consuming than just using ROM clips. Now here's how to optimize your disk images for FC8 compression. Let's say that you have an 8 megabyte ROM SIMM and you're thinking about using my 12 megabyte disk image here. So let's duplicate it so we can work on a copy and then boot Mini vMac with it. And then we'll zoom in here. And let's just say that you've gone through everything and you like most everything, but you don't need Photoshop. Now up here in the right corner, it looks like you have 823K of free space, and technically you do, but I can tell you that if you add anything more to this particular disk image without first deleting something, FC8 won't compress this disk image small enough to fit on the 8 megabyte ROM SIMM. We see using the get info here that it's 800,000 bytes in size. So after we delete this Photoshop folder, we have to make sure that whatever we copy to this disk image is 800,000 bytes or less. And if we zoom out here, we can see that I have a disk image of TIFF files. And if we take a look at the size, it is 599,000 bytes. So quite a bit smaller than the Photoshop file, or Photoshop folder that we just deleted. And so you might think, hey, if I copy this over, it should work perfectly well, right? Well, it actually won't. And I'm going to quit out of here to show you why. And you'll probably be a little bit surprised. So we're going to test this in the SIMM Programmer app. I have my programmer connected and turned on, which is why this comes up like this. We're going to click the middle tab, Create ROM with ROM Disk. And I'm going to need to use the Big Mess of Wires ROM file because that supports FC8 compression. So I'll just drag it up here. And then I'm going to use, this is the copy that we made, right? So I need to drag that into the lower field here. And now it is compressing and it says, hey, the disk image is too large by 122,000 bytes. Oh my, now how did this happen? Well, the problem is that when you delete something, the data is actually still in the disk image, but you can't see it. And that's why FC8 can't compress the disk image as small as possible. So whenever you delete something from your disk image, you have to create a blank image of the same size, which in this case is 12 megabytes. So I'll go ahead and create one of these to the desktop folder, and we'll call it Fresh 12. Now we'll go back into Mini vMac. And this is what we made, right? We have the TIFF images folder here. So what we need to do is open up the Fresh 12 disk that I just made. We want to initialize it, erase it, and we'll call it Fresh 12. And then we need to open it up. And what we want to do is copy all of these files to it, just like this. And as I told you before, you want to make it look pretty because this is going to be on a ROM, right? It's all going to be fixed this way. And then you want to restart, you want to slow down the speed, you want to boot from your Fresh 12 this time. And I'm going to hold down the Option and Command keys so as to rebuild the desktop. That's always something that you want to do. And then make sure that your window is open and all of that. And so now we can shut down and get out of here. And then we go back to our little guy here, and we're going to replace that disk image with our Fresh 12 disk. And now it says it's compressing, right? And this time it compressed with 13K of space free. Perfect. Now, if you have a defective or missing stock ROM SIMM, the solution is easy, so long as you have a flashable custom ROM SIMM. If you have something that's 2 megabytes or the GGLABs sells a 512 kilobyte, then that wouldn't be so wasteful. But technically you can flash a stock ROM to a custom ROM of any size. All you need to do is go to the Macintosh Garden website, and I've put a link in the text description of where this is located. And let's just say for now that you need an SC30 ROM. And I actually uploaded this to the Garden recently. So you just click to download that file. And then you'll need to decompress it because it's a zip file, but that's easy if you've got the STUFFIT expander there. And then what you need to do is open up your SIMM programmer software here. And since my programmer is already powered, then it comes up just like this. And then we just need to drag in that file. And of course, if we click Identify Chips, then that will set the SIMM capacity for us. And once that is set, it says yes it is. This is a KCobot ROM SIMM, by the way. Then erase write entire SIMM, verify after writing, and all you need to do is click Write to SIMM. Now, one other nifty thing is a special feature that Doug added to his SIMM Programmer app. Check this out, it's really neat. We'll go ahead and turn off the programmer. I have a stock SC30 ROM SIMM here, and I'm going to put that in right now. Power on. And if you click Read from SIMM to File, and then Verify ROM Checksum, it will read the entire ROM SIMM contents. And then it tells us that the checksum comes out correct. It's an older ROM, 256K, standard 2xCX or SE30 ROM image. So this wonderful feature will allow you to check your stock ROMs to see if they're okay. Great! When testing in my SE30, I confirmed that my socketed 50 MHz DayStar Power Cache accelerator and my 50 MHz Demo PDS accelerator have no problem with any vendor's ROM SIMs, regardless of whether you use the Big Mess of Wires ROM file or the Rob Braun base ROM file. I also confirmed that my Micron Exceed Color 30HR video card and my Macro Color 30HR video card work just fine with any ROM sim and with either of those ROM files. However, the DayStar Turbo040 accelerator, which in the SE30 requires this TS adapter, it does not work with the Big Mess of Wires ROM file or Rob Braun's base ROM file. The good news is that there was a special base ROM file that was created for olePigeon at the 68K MLA, and I've put a link to that in the text description for you. Sadly, if you use the olePigeon ROM file on your SE30 with your Turbo040, you lose the ability to read and write 1.44 megabyte floppies, whether they be real floppies or virtual floppies on something like a floppy EMU. And that's kind of odd because you can continue to read and write 400K and 800K floppies, whether real or virtual. You also lose the ability to boot from an HD20 hard drive or the floppy EMU in HD20 mode. And of course you can't have your own customizable disk image that you can boot from either. So I consider all those problems to be kind of a deal breaker for me. If somebody could come along and fix that, it would be great. But for now, it's not a ROM file that I would use personally with a Turbo040. Now you do have two other options though. You could use a stock SE30 ROM. You're not going to have your bootable customizable disk image. Sadly, you're not going to be able to boot from an HD20 or your floppy EMU in HD20 mode. And you can't bypass those painfully slow RAM checks at cold boot. But it'll work with a Turbo040. And you can use your 1.44 megabyte floppies, real or virtual, just fine. Another option is, slightly better, 2FX, 2CI, or 2SI ROM. It's a little bit better than the stock SE30 ROM because you can boot from an HD20 or floppy EMU in HD20 mode, but again, you cannot have your customizable disk image, and you cannot bypass those painfully slow RAM checks at cold boot. There's never been a better time to get started with custom ROM SIMs. You've got a variety of ROM SIM vendors to choose from, and now the programmer's back with an all-new beefed-up app that's truly groundbreaking. And I can't say enough about the hard work that downtown Doug Brown put into his app last month in August, working all month to totally revamp it, making it much easier for you to do a variety of things, but especially to flash your favorite software to any vendor's ROM sim. Just absolutely amazing. Doug, I applaud you on a job well done. I also have high praise for the CayMac team for, of course, resurrecting the programmer, but also for working closely with Doug to get it right. And I must say, they certainly got the case right. I absolutely love the frosted case. But not only that, CayMac Vintage just announced their version 2 programmer at VCF Midwest, featuring an all-new modern processor recommended by Doug, which can flash ROM SIMs up to twice as fast compared to all previous programmers.
Welcome everyone, this is Will, CayMac Vintage, and today we are announcing the ROM SIM programmer that's going to be called ROM-Mate 2. So we have it with a case or without a case available on our website and available here to purchase now. So if you want your ROM SIM programmer, please visit the site.
Fantastic stuff. I also have high praise for Steve Chamberlin for, after all these years, fixing his Tetris Max game so it works perfectly under System 6 now and on a ROM sim. Steve also was very kind in giving me permission to give you permission to flash my 3 ROM files to the ROM SIMs from any vendor, 2 megabyte, 4 megabyte, 8 megabyte, and I absolutely love his FC8 Compression, which allowed me to fit so much more software on those custom ROM files. Also be sure to watch the ending credits where I thank other fabulous people who contributed some amazing things to make this video great. And don't forget to expand out the text description, because I have my download link there to the zip archive that you're going to need to follow the tutorial in Mini vMac, and I put a lot of other links and information resources that are very useful for you there too. Now, even though this video largely focused on the SE30, the content mostly applies still to the 2SI, 2CX, 2CI, 2X, and 2FX. So, whether you already have a ROM SIM and a programmer, or whether you're just getting started, you now have all of the information you need to start having some serious fun. Thanks for watching today, folks, and I wish all of you a wonderful day.